Godzilla Raids Again, or Godzilla no Gyakushu, Godzilla's counterattack in the original Japanese, was released on April 24, 1955. It was produced by Toho, runs for 81 minutes, filmed in black and white in 1.37 to 1 film aspect ratio, the same as the preceding Godzilla film. It is the second film in the Godzilla series, released 6 months after the 1954 original, and only 4 months after director Motoyoshi Oda's previous film, Invisible Man. It is the first Godzilla film to pit Godzilla against another monster, and it is the first film in the series to feature a soundtrack by Maestro Masaru Sato. Like its predecessor, it also draws inspiration from a short story by science fiction author Shigeru Kayama, with screenwriter Takeo Murata returning from the first film to fashion the screenplay, this time alongside Shigeaki Hidaka. Eiji Tsuburaya, of course, returns as special effects director and continues to innovate on the suitmation techniques pioneered in the previous film. After the success of the original Godzilla, producer Tomiyuki Tanaka was eager to make a sequel. The original film's director, Ishiro Honda, was already at work on Half Human, but that production encountered difficulties and was delayed, so Tanaka kicked off production of the Godzilla sequel, ostensibly to fill in the gap in the release schedule. Director Oda seems like a natural choice in this situation given his track record of producing films on extraordinarily tight schedules. Invisible Man, after all, hit theaters only 2 months after his previous film, Ghost Man. Rather than lean into the darker tone of Honda's film, Oda instead delivered a sequel that is lighter in tone, and which focuses on character more than allegory. Whereas Honda's characters were overshadowed by the eponymous monster, an overt allegory for nuclear holocaust, Oda's characters are front and center, and the story unfolds from their perspective. The relatable characters of Godzilla Raids Again are an improvement over the original Godzilla, but on the other hand, the tone shift is a little too dramatic from the previous film. This is especially apparent in an expository scene after Godzilla and Anguirus are first discovered. Leading scientists once again blame atomic tests for creating monsters, but with none of the commensurate political overtones. We get a flashback of the previous film's events in the form of a silent newsreel, stripped of all sound, music, and emotional impact. Already, the nuclear metaphor has been reduced to a plot device, which is only referenced once to justify the monsters, and is never spoken of again. The original Godzilla leaned heavily into the nuclear metaphor, with scenes in the aftermath of Tokyo's destruction resembling a bombed-out Hiroshima, and emphasizing the plight of the monster's victims, with some being treated for radiation exposure. We don't get any of that here. In fact, the worst complaint of the main characters is that if a monster does show up, they won't be able to enjoy their fish. If it weren't for the monsters, you'd be forgiven for thinking these films weren't actually related to each other. The film's plot focuses on the employees of a fishing company, aptly named Marine Fisheries, especially its 2 pilots, Tsukioka and Kobayashi, and the radio girls in the home office, including Hidemi, the boss's daughter and Tsukioka's love interest. Kobayashi's plane malfunctions and is forced to land on a remote island, where both Tsukioka and Kobayashi encounter 2 monsters. Everyone's worst fears are realized when scientists confirm that one of them is the same species as Godzilla, who raided Japan the year before. The other monster, Anguirus, is a different species, but no doubt just as formidable. Since no known weapons are effective against the monsters, the Defense Force decides not to engage them head-on, but rather stall them and draw them away from the mainland. Through a series of unfortunate events, the monsters are accidentally drawn straight into the heart of Osaka, the home of Marine Fisheries. The employees are forced to watch helplessly as their headquarters are laid waste along with the rest of the city while Godzilla defeats Anguirus in a fight to the death. But life goes on, they clean up what they can, and transfer most of their staff to another fishery in Hokkaido. Everyone partakes in a rowdy gathering at a rustic inn to boost morale, but the revelry is cut short when Godzilla reappears off the coast. The pilots leap into action, and the stage is set for the final showdown. The cast is led by Hiroshi Koizumi, who would go on to be a regular in the genre, albeit in lesser supporting roles as scientists or detectives, but mostly scientists. Godzilla Raids Again is a rare glimpse of Koizumi in the role of a dashing leading man, and a pilot no less. And Koizumi himself reportedly remarked that he had fond memories of this film for precisely this reason. This would be Koizumi's most interesting role in the genre, at least until 1963's Matango. But regardless, Koizumi continued to appear in Godzilla films in the 70s, 80s, and even the early 2000s. Koizumi is paired here with Minoru Chiaki in what I think is his only Kaiju-Eiga film appearance. He's much better known for his numerous appearances in Akira Kurosawa films, including Rashomon, Seven Samurai, Hidden Fortress, and Throne of Blood. His Kobayashi is certainly more comical than his roles in those other movies, but he plays the part effortlessly. Chiaki's son, actor Katsuhiko Sasaki, would appear in several genre films in the 70s, 80s, and 90s. Koizumi's love interest is played by Setsuko Wakayama. Apart from this film and Snow Trail, also known as Toshiro Mifune's debut film, I'm not aware of any other film she appeared in that would be considered popular outside of Japan. Her Hidemi character has a surprising amount of depth for someone who doesn't contribute meaningfully to the plot. She just doesn't have a lot to do while the men are out busy fighting monsters. Wakayama convincingly portrays Hidemi as an office gossip, spoiled boss's daughter, and sort of spoiled girlfriend, alternately rushing to Tsukioka for help and chiding him for his stubbornness. Tsukioka and Hidemi together, in my opinion, make for a better romantic couple than the leading characters from the previous film. Granted, Akira Takarada and Momoko Kochi were newly minted actors at the time, whereas Koizumi and Wakayama, while still early in their careers, had completed several more movies by the time Godzilla Raids Again came around. Wakayama's career was tragically cut short due to poor health, and she took her own life in 1985, and this is likely to be the role she'll continue to be remembered for. Tsukioka's wartime buddies are played by the always great Yoshio Tsuchiya and Ren Yamamoto, returning from the previous film where he played the doomed islander Masaji. Their captain is played by Seijiro Onda, also returning from the previous film where he played one of the dueling MPs in the Diet. Here he wears two hats, that of a father figure shepherding his beloved former subordinates and taking an interest in their affairs, and then when Godzilla appears, he immediately puts on his captain's hat and readies his old squad for action. There's a very, very brief moment near the climax when Onda wears both hats at once, and it's a phenomenal little bit of acting. Also returning from the previous film is Takashi Shimura as Dr. Yamane, although he doesn't have much to do here besides cement the chronology between the two films. Yamane is the first recurring human character in the Godzilla series, and the only recurring character I'm aware of in the Showa era. Alas, we also have some character duds, such as Hidemi's father, Mr. Yamaji, played by Yukio Kasama, who doesn't so much act as react to everything else. There's also Masao Shimizu playing a stereotypical scientist, but given he appears in the same scene as Yamane, his character is a little redundant. He does, however, come with a nifty book that somehow explains everything they need to know about Anguirus. The story definitely has more slice-of-life moments sprinkled in between monster fights, again indicative of the tone shift from the previous film. There are some problems with the pacing, however. The big monster fight spectacle between Godzilla and Anguirus kicks off less than halfway through the film, after a lengthy, slow-moving cops and robbers car chase, and ends with Anguirus getting killed off. The duel between Godzilla and the fighter jets reserved for the finale is just not as gripping by comparison. It also goes on a little long, with a break in the action to give Koizumi an excuse to grab his own plane. The special effects are certainly much improved and better executed than in the first film. For one thing, the monster scenes aren't nearly as dark and grainy. Everything is brighter, cleaner, and much easier to see. The monster fight choreography is adequate, but still pretty good for the world's first kaiju fight. Once again, suit actors Haruo Nakajima and Katsumi Tezuka are inhabiting the monsters, with Nakajima taking sole possession of the Godzilla suit, while Tezuka donned the Anguirus costume. While Anguirus holds the distinction of being Godzilla's first kaiju opponent, this was his only appearance for 13 years, until he was brought back for 1968's Monsters Slugfest Destroy All Monsters, at which time he became one of Godzilla's staunchest allies for the remainder of the Showa series. Speaking of kaiju choreography, one of the most recognizable aspects of this film's monster fights is the speed. Literally, how fast the monsters move. This was allegedly because of an error when setting the frame rate on one of the cameras. Kaiju scenes are typically filmed with high-speed photography, which when played back at regular speed causes everything to slow down, creating the illusion of giant monsters having great mass. One of the early shots on this film, however, had a particular camera set to film at slow speed, which when played back at regular speed had the opposite effect, causing the monsters to move with unnatural swiftness. Apparently, Eiji Tsuburaya was okay with this, because the same technique is used in several more scenes throughout the film, and even in some later films as well. We also have monster puppet fights, which somehow look even more ridiculous than the puppet from the previous film. Godzilla in particular has a serious overbite, and when you've got two of them fighting, you can't help picturing the one or two guys just out of frame having a Muppet-style throwdown. These effect shots further alienate Godzilla Raids Again from the tone of its predecessor, from dark and moody to almost playful. The climactic showdown between Godzilla and the fighter jets features ample model planes and missiles, and these are again a dramatic improvement over the props from the original film. Close-ups are less cluttered with obnoxious wireworks, and missiles are depicted actually striking a target instead of bouncing harmlessly off the painted backdrop, as before. But golly, there's a lot of explosions. I swear Tsuburaya must have had a whole dresser drawer of this stuff he was just dying to use, and yes, while it looks great, it goes on for way too long. The miniature work is generally great, with the greatest prop being the Osaka Castle miniature destroyed by both monsters. The castle was famously destroyed twice. The first time it fell incorrectly, and didn't match the monster's movements, forcing the effects staff to rebuild it at great cost, and reshoot it. There is a single miniature shot that I don't think is up to snuff. When Godzilla makes landfall in Osaka, he swipes the lighthouse with his tail, and the effect is underwhelming, to say the least. The most shocking effect, though, has to be the flooding subway tunnel. Just see for yourself. The score by Masaru Sato is yet another departure from the previous film, whereas original composer Akira Ifukube scores monster scenes with loud, blaring horns and smashing drum beats, Sato's themes are less so. In fact, the only real theme of note is the opening title theme. The rest of the incidental music is a bed of low strings and winds, which doesn't sound like much in isolation, but in the early scenes of the Defense Force tracking the monsters, boy does that music enhance the mood. However, because Sato refuses to overpower the senses with music during the monster fight scenes, it often feels like there isn't actually any music being played at all, and the scenes don't feel as dynamic as they should. Sato would return to score several more films in the Showa era, starting in the late 60s, by which time he'd established his jazzy big band sound and really spruced up his monster themes. In the final analysis, this sequel is certainly a departure from the original in terms of tone, with marked improvements in characterizations, great strides in effects execution, though still not perfect, and a decent storyline that suffers from a few glaring pacing issues. It's certainly a different animal than Godzilla, but it's a close call as to whether it's actually better. Having watched both films back to back recently, if I'm being honest, I say that while the first film is obviously a classic and the more influential of the two, I'm inclined to think the sequel is the more enjoyable one to watch. I rate it a solid 3 out of 4 stars. The original Godzilla was released in the United States in an edited version with new scenes inserted starring American actor Raymond Burr and retitled Godzilla King of the Monsters. Godzilla Raids Again also made its way stateside in 1959, released by Warner Brothers as Gigantus, the Fire Monster. The reason for the name change was supposedly because the producers didn't want this movie to be confused with the previous film, even though it's literally a sequel. I don't know how producers' brains work sometimes. Originally, the film was meant to incorporate substantial new material shot in Hollywood, and Toho reportedly sent over a pair of monster suits specifically for this reason. What we got instead was a horribly re-edited and dubbed film with newly inserted stock footage that often borders on the non sequitur, a totally replaced soundtrack, and non-stop narration from Tsukioka's character.
We dashed out of our hiding place, through the rocky cavern as the monsters still fought underwater, creating a spout of bubbling foam.
This is the film that contains the infamous dubbed line,
Banana oil.
This version was released on VHS in 1989 as Godzilla Raids Again, which is Toho's official international English title for the film. In 2007, Classic Media re-released this version and the original Japanese theatrical version as part of their updated Godzilla DVD collection. Special features include the featurette The Art of Suit Acting, narrated by Ed Godzacheski, and a commentary of the American version by Steve Reifel, which, if you haven't listened to it, is hilarious. Most recently, Godzilla Raids Again was included in the 8-disc Blu-ray set of Godzilla, the Showa films from the Criterion Collection. Godzilla Raids Again is also streaming on the Criterion channel and is available to rent or purchase from a variety of digital platforms. Special features include the featurette The Art of Suit Acting, narrated by Ged Godzacheski.
That's a spoonerism.